It's Rhema Afternoons and catching up with the Reverend Frank Ritchie. Frank, tomorrow, a bit of a significant day in terms of the Christian calendar, a celebration of Francis of Assisi.
Yeah, Saint Francis of Assisi. Now, we don't talk about many of the saints, and outside of, say, Catholic churches or Orthodox churches, particularly for those of us who have grown up in evangelical and Protestant traditions, that it's not like we regularly have these saints that we acknowledge through the year, but it's very normal for the largest portion of people around the world who consider themselves Christian. And Saint Francis is one of the most well known, Saint Francis
Yeah,
of Assisi.
he's
And
got
I
a
think many
fascinating
of us.
story.
He
Yeah, well,
is.
let's touch on that because I don't want to take for granted either. Because I mean, it's a story. How many of us, as you say, are perhaps familiar with? So let's, maybe put this in a little bit of context, Frank.
Yeah, so St. Francis, I think, would be known to many Protestants as the kind of nature loving guy who gave himself over to poverty. He was born in 1181. Now, his actual name is beautiful because, of course, he's Italian. But because Francis is such a common name these days, or so well known, we don't kind of hear it as Italian. But his born name, he was baptized as Giovanni di Pietro di Bonadoni.
Mm.
And then he, of course,
Wow.
changed his name to St. Francis. And he comes from quite a noble, quite a wealthy family. So his vow of poverty that he ended up taking was a relatively big deal. And that evolved over a period of time. So he lived quite a wild youth as a son of a nobleman, as a relatively wealthy young individual. But then there were some experiences that he had along the way that changed him. Went off to join the army, and there was some strange sort of vision. I'm yet to find any detail on it, but some sort of strange vision that he had when he went to enlist in the army that seemed to deal to any sense he had of wanting worldly goods. And then some other things happen. He ends up in a little Italian town, San Damiano, and he goes into a church there. It's a ruined church, but there's this amazing cross up on the wall, and he has a vision and God telling him to repair his church, which he took to mean that church, since that particular little church was in ruin.
Mm.
But I think we could look at the life of St. Francis at a time where the Catholic Church was extremely wealthy. People would turn up to beg in their droves at the Vatican. He was one of them at one point, and we can see that probably those words that he heard from God weren't just about that little church, they're about the bigger church. And he ends up going down the path of taking a vow of poverty. Then he ends up having people follow him. He starts a new order that we know as the Franciscans. The Pope agrees to the rules that he sets in place for his people, and they go out and they spread the gospel. And they're all about peace. They're all about poverty. They're all about bringing to God. Little known thing about St. Francis, the nativity scene that many of us love at Christmas time.
Mm-hmm.
St. Francis was the first to put that in place. He did it with live animals and live people in a cave, and then it evolved from there to the nativity scene that many of us know and love.
Wow.
Prior to St. Francis, the nativity scene wasn't a thing.
So
Wow. Okay. You learn something new every day.
you totally do. So, Frank, I'm wondering then, how do we take this story, and it's quite mind blowing. I mean, there's lots and lots of different parts to it, but apply that to today's cultural context, and perhaps you and I. What does the life of Saint Francis of Assisi mean to us?
Yeah, it's a really good question because St. Francis, of course, existed 800 years ago. So we could very easily ask, well, how's that relevant? But when you think about the great pillars of St. Francis's life, the vow of poverty, the kind of giving up of abundance, and the recognition that the abundance was dangerous to his faith, I think many of us could look at our lives and take that on as a challenge. What does it mean to live simply and not just to
Mm.
chase after stuff and after the next thing? What does it mean to put God first? He had a very keen interest in the environment. I mean, the guy preached to animals, so did his followers. And the classic images of St. Francis have him holding birds and birds alighting on him. So I think that care for God's creation and the good gift of the earth that he has given to us, I think that's a good thing to take on board. And then his love for other people and people of difference. There was one of the Crusades that was breaking out. He's known for having gone and visited one of the sultans from the other side to try and convert him. But whilst the conversion might not have been successful, that desire for peace, I think, was something that he really stood for. And in an age of conflict, in an age of division, asking that question, what does it mean to see the image of God in other people that we differ from, and to not argue with them, but to seek peace with them and to find the common ground? I think those are aspects of St. Francis' life that are simply deeply human and therefore relevant for all of us.
I hear this conversation, and just as we come to a close, the thing that strikes me, though, is so often we can try to do these things. Like we think, oh, well, maybe a vow of poverty is the way to go, or, to make some extreme changes in the way that we might respond to maybe environmental issues, just to put it in the context of the discussion that we're having. But when you talk about the gospel, how can we take something like this and realize that it's actually a change inside of us? The good news of our relationship with Christ is an internal change, our heart being changed. And then we see an outflow of those things. How do we sort of unpack that and keep that in context?
That's a really good point, Tom. St. Francis' life ultimately is an example of the God who invaded his very being. When you look at the pivotal changes in his life, they all involve a revelation from God. We're people who believe in a God that reveals himself to us and a God that changes us. And I think, therefore, we have to be people who are open to that revelation, open to hearing it, not allowing our senses to be dulled, and then having the courage to go with it when those revelations occur. I mean, St. Francis could very easily have ignored any call to poverty because of the comfortable life that he had on offer, but he didn't. He ran with that revelation. So I think being open to that revelation, having the courage to go with it, is the real challenge for us. And then those other things were the outflow of his willingness to go with what was being revealed to him.
It is a real challenge, isn't it, Frank? Because what does that look like for each of us? And often it's spending time and being with God and, being in his word as well. Frank, thank you so much for being on the show today as we take a look at the life of St. Francis of Assisi and, of course, that feast day happening tomorrow. Thanks again.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on Rhema. Now, if you found value in today's content, hit that like button. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to our channel with the subscribe button. This really helps us to continue to produce more quality content for you. And hey, if you'd like to stay updated and never miss any of our future videos, ring that notification bell as well. Don't forget to follow us on our other socials, which are in the description below. And until then, stay tuned.